Hello, my name is Niklas Mynterovic. I'm the coordinator of the Writing Center, and welcome to the first PhD academic writing webinar. First, I need to introduce you guys to the format. First of all, we're planning to have webinars on a monthly basis from February, today, to June. It's going to be the last Thursday of each month between 12:15 and 13. It was a little bit of a delay today, 5 minutes, because we had some technical issues, but I think it's all sorted out at this point. The thing is that we have chosen the topic for this intro webinar. I'm going to talk about composition in academic writing. But our thought is that it's supposed to be a democratic process where you guys can write comments, send an email, and you can you could suggest future topics. So the way you could do that is that you could comment in the chat. You can send us an email. And we're also setting up a discussion room in Canvas. We have a Canvas room called SWR100, Scientific Resource Portal. And the thought is that you can continue the discussion, you can give us feedback, and you can give us some alternatives on future topics, things that you are interested in and that you find to be useful. Future webinars will be held by me or by our PhD candidate and senior writing advisor Clayton Gwynn, and or any other person that seems suitable for whatever topic you want to know more about. It could be someone from the library. It should not be someone that are from a very specific field. It should be someone that could talk about writing on such a general level that it applies for everyone. Then I'll have to tell you about our scientific writing resource portal. It is called SWR100, and you will find it if you log into Canvas. First, you log in, then you press Courses, Emner, then All Courses, Alle Emner, and then it should appear. Sometimes it's at the top left, and other times it's bottom right. Click on the course, enroll in the course, bli medlem, and then you will be able to press modules at the top, and you could choose any topic that you like. It could be paragraph structure, it could be clarity in academic writing, it could be structure, it could be a lot of different things, but choose the topic that you find interesting. So, the thing is that if you're not able to be a part of this webinar, we are recording all the webinars and we will upload them to Canvas, so you can watch them whenever you have the time. And you could also watch half of it, and then maybe you have to leave for a meeting or something, and then you can watch the recorded version on Canvas. All right, let's start out. Composition. This is just a definition that I've taken from dictionary.com. And if you look at the first one, composition means the act of combining parts or elements to form a whole. It could also mean the resulting state or product. So it could be a finished product, a finished text, for example. It could be manner of being composed in the sense of structure. So this painting has an orderly composition. Think about if you think about a thesis or a dissertation, it could have an orderly composition. And then just a little bit back, look at number 6. This one is a little bit funny. A short essay written as a school exercise. Maybe not that relevant for you at this point, but it's still kind of funny. Number 7, the act or process of producing a literary work. That is exactly what you're doing when you're writing. So this one is spot on, I think. Number 8 is pretty funny, an academic course for teaching the techniques of clear expository writing, just like this webinar. So this webinar is in its own right a composition. Number 9, the art of putting words and sentences together in accordance with the rules of grammar and rhetoric. And this one is important for what I'm going to talk about later. The building blocks for communicating any type of information is grammar. And rhetorics are how we choose our words to be able to communicate the information as best and most effective as possible. A piece of music and the art of composing music. Both of these are interesting because there are some similarities between writing and composing music, or making a painting for that sake, which is number 12, fine arts. The organization or grouping of the different parts of a work of art so as to achieve a unified whole. So, to conclude, composing is in many ways piecing parts together to create a unified whole. And think about it like this. Even though you're creating new parts that you piece together, these parts are themselves combinations of surrounding information. And in this case, letters are the fundamental unit. So think about composing something on the micro level and on the macro level. The small things all the way down to a sentence, to a book, to a complete text. So, well, composing is writing. This is exactly what you do when you write. You piece parts together to create a unified whole. And the purpose is obviously to communicate information. And there's many different ways to communicate something, but that is the main purpose of writing. And there's only one method to do this. You have to tell a story. It has to be a narrative. And a narrative, it goes like this. Start out with the beginning, and then you have to introduce the reader to what you're actually writing about. And then it has a middle part, action, where everything is kind of happening. And then you have an end. And this would be your conclusion in many ways. So this is the only way to actually communicate information. It has to be a narrative. It has to make logical sense. It has to be connected. It's very difficult to communicate any type of information if you rearrange the sentence completely. Then the meaning might disappear. So when it comes to academic writing, this would be the way to go. This is a very general illustration of how to build an academic text. So the beginning would be to develop context. Start out with introducing the reader to the most basic things that is necessary to understand what you are writing about. And then you will kind of narrow, you will identify some borders, you will make it much more specific, and that will end up with your, in many cases, your research question, your thesis statement, or maybe a hypothesis. And then comes the middle part, the text analysis. And this is where your, sometimes you have a literature review or a theory chapter. You might have results. No, you might have methods, and then you might have results, and then discussion. So this is kind of where the work really is. Then, in opposite logic of the introduction, you have the ending. And then you start out really specific. Instead of starting out general like you should do in the beginning, you start out specific with restating the thesis statement or the problem formulations or your hypothesis. You present your main findings, and then you try to reconnect that to a wider context. And the point with that is to show why your science, why your research is of importance. Okay? So what we will focus on for this webinar is this. And this is the ideas of rhetoric. Rhetoric could be defined as the art of persuasion. And I'm not talking about fooling other people, but I'm talking about being able to communicate your idea in such a manner that people believe what you're saying. And this model, this kind of this idea of rhetorics consists of logos, pathos, and ethos, and it's was formulated by philosopher Aristotle. So we will start out with logos, then I will go to ethos, and then we will talk about pathos in the end. Okay, perfect. So first of all, logos is logic. And the way I will focus on it, or I will talk about it in the sense that it will refer to the logical structure of an academic text and the subject and the facts of an argument and how you present these subjects and facts. It also includes reason. It might be communicated through case studies, cause and effect, statistics, analogies, quantitative research, but I will focus on logos or logics as ways of composing a text and how to communicate information in a logical manner. And also in many ways in a narratological manner. Then we have ethos, and this is about honesty, evidence, credibility, fairness, reliability. Here we might talk about evidence in the sense that you have based your research on something, probably probably results from other people's research. Then we have pathos, and that is about appealing to emotions and feelings. And when we're writing, we could think about this as tone, how you choose to communicate something, which words you choose, who you're writing for. Because think about it this way. When you speak to someone, you choose your words depending on who you speak to. You speak to your friends in a different manner than you speak to your colleague. You speak to your family in a different manner than you speak to, let's say, a stranger. So this also goes for how we write. We choose our words and also the logics in our arguments depending on who's listening and who we want to talk to. So I will start out with logos, then we will talk about ethos, and then pathos. So it kind of goes counterclockwise. Okay. So logos, logic and reason. And as sorry about this, but it's a lot of things to do at the same time. So logic's composition, the structure of your ideas. Think about it, how do you actually compose logic? And as we talked about earlier, it comes down to the units, the building blocks of language. And you need to put these parts together to create something that makes logical sense. In this case, it would be a narrative. It would be a story. So think about it this way. Your research will only make sense if its components are presented in the right order. And the right order, what is the right order? Well, that's a good question. It could be something like this, but it could also be something like this. This is what we call Imrad structure. It means introduction, methods, results, and discussion. In this model, also title, author, abstract, keywords is included at the top, and then references is included at the bottom. So this might be the model for many different scientific disciplines. Most of them use Imrad structure to a certain point, or a version of this. This is also Imrad structure, but it has something extra. Number 2, the literature review, or the main concepts. And in social sciences, this is where you would present all the different concepts the theoretical concepts that you want to use to analyze something. That could be any kind of social phenomenon, it could be an historical text, it could be many different things. But this is where you present the theoretical framework that you will analyze something with. So in this case, you might not have results in the same sense that you have in the natural sciences, but you have a pretty large discussion part where you use the concepts that are presented in the theory chapter to analyze something. This obviously depends on what you have been doing, what kind of research you have been conducting, but that's at least one way of doing it. So, this one is kind of interesting because this is someone trying to make sense of their own PhD, of their own research. So this is something, if you look at, here you can basically see, you can see the big picture and the small, you can see the big stuff and the small stuff. Starts out with the research question, objectives and the scope, and then it leads into chapter 2, legal and environmental, and this is about blue mining aspects, or about mining at the bottom of the sea. So chapter 2 is relatively fundamental, and then it leads into studies 1, 2, 3, which makes out chapter 3 and all the way to chapter 5, which deals with these different aspects. It ends up with blue mining aspects, and then that leads into spatial mining, mine planning, and then into the general discussion, the conclusion, and this one is important. It says something about recommendations, and that will probably lead into sustainability and sustainable development. So the interesting thing about this one is that it shows the larger story, the big thing, the large narrative, but it also gives us some insight into each chapter and what that actually includes. And there you have the smaller narratives that drives the entire story. You can think about these other chapters. They are kind of they are pieces that make out the entire composition. Here is another model, someone else trying to make sense of their own PhD. Here we have an overview of thesis chapter 1 at the top. And that leads into what looks like 3 different studies consisting of some chapters each. And then that ends up with some kind of conclusion. Here's another one. This one is built up a little differently. Starts out with chapter 1, preface and introduction, and then chapter 2 seems to be kind of like the fundament for both of the studies. It might be 2 studies, it might be 3. One is about grinding biomechanics, and the other one is about physical conditioning, and then that leads into power invention. So it's not really important what this is about, but this is just I've included this to give you some insight into what or how people have composed their PhD. So the point is that you really want to, wait a second. Okay, you really want to structure your ideas according to a format or a recipe familiar to the audience. So it might be using IMRAD structure, it might be using a structure which is more, which we see in the social sciences, but you really want to follow the recipe that is used in your specific field. And there are structural requirements and preferences within every scientific discipline. So the point is that you don't want to surprise anyone. Just to make a comparison, when you go to an opera, you don't expect thrash metal. So you should probably get opera because that is what you have paid for. Think about it as this. There are structural requirements in every discipline, so you should follow that. that is the recipe that the readers are expecting. So one thing is, you really want to structure something in a certain way, composing something in a certain way to communicate information as best as possible. But a central aspect of structure is also what the audience expects. And what they tend to expect is a coherent and logical storyline that presents the information in an orderly and understandable manner. So this doesn't only apply for the big thing, for the chapters and how they are interlinked. This is something that we can take all the way down to paragraph level, and also sentences, and also words for that sake. But I want you to take a look at this. This is something that we could call paragraph principles. Number one, you should keep the topic visible. So you should begin with the familiar and simple. And this is exactly like the model I showed you earlier. You should start out with the general, and then you should get more specific. So you start out with something fundamental, and then you build with explanation and support. So this is where the actual information in the paragraph is. This is where you actually explain what you are writing about. Then, number three is, you really want to end with a new complex emphasis. So that means some kind of conclusion, some kind of idea. So first of all, you state your topic, and this is what we call a topic sentence. This would be the first sentence of a paragraph. And then the following sentences is all about explaining the content of the topic sentence. So it explains the topic, it provides supporting details, and at this point, you really want to demonstrate your analysis and your understanding of the specific topic. This will lead into the conclusion, and this is typically the last sentence of a single paragraph. It should summarize the main idea, but it should also connect the idea that you have been talking about to the idea that will be presented in the next paragraph. This is the transition. We could also call it a bridge if you want to. And this might be the tricky part, but this is what will glue all the different paragraphs together, and this will create logic. This is the logos. This is where we will have a narrative. This is where you create a story instead of lots of different parts of information that doesn't necessarily fit together. This is how you create a logical flow. And this is a central aspect of any composition, that it makes sense. So here's an example that I find to be relatively effective. And by the way, we call this seek structure. The name doesn't really matter, but seek structure is a way of writing a paragraph to communicate the idea as effectively as possible. So first, we state the topic. And I'm going to read this paragraph out loud. Google has one of the largest and most advanced computer networks. So here we have the topic of the sentence, as we call topic sentence. Then we do some explanation. Its network has thousands of miles of fiber optic cable and uses advanced software-defined networking. So this is an explanation of the information that is introduced with the topic sentence. Then in green, we have an example. After Google laid its fiber optic cable under the Pacific Ocean, half of the world accessed its service. And then comes the conclusion. This has made Google the most used computer network in the world for information searches, which have implications for cybersecurity. So what do you think the next paragraph is about? Well, it should be about cybersecurity. This is a really elegant way of making the paragraphs, linking the paragraphs together and give the text a flow, give the text a logical connection. Next part is ethos, or evidence and credibility. We could also call this ethics. Wait a second, I just need to... So, evidence and credibility. This is just the definition of evidence taken from the dictionary. The available body of facts of information indicating whether a belief or proposition is true or valid. And this is the definition of credibility, also from the dictionary. The quality of being trusted and believed in. So these are obviously linked together. The thing is that evidence plus credibility is, in many ways, the components used to construct your composition or narrative. It is supportive information from different sources, and this will provide a credible foundation for your own research. The evidence that provides credibility could be from other sources. It could be from your own research or a combination of the two. In most cases, that's the way it is. You produce some evidence yourself, and you also build your research on other people's research that will have the role as evidence. So, to conclude, evidence supports and justifies the composition and provides credibility. And this could be an article like this one from Journal of Applied Ecology. It could be the whole article. Let's say that you will use more or less everything that this article contains. Or it could be just these results. Beaver temperature correlation. It could be that. Or it could be, whoops, wait a second. Or it could be a fundamental equation, a mathematical equation. This is Newton's second law of motion. So all these are building blocks that will be central parts of the composition, and it will provide evidence but also credibility, and especially when it comes to an equation like Newton's second law of motion. The thing is that by using this as a system or a language, you're basing your research on a body of information with enormous credibility through countless successful experiments and inventions. So this will all contribute, this will all give credibility. Okay. So the thing is that evidence must be presented at the right time and place in the composition to be able to support the main idea. And this kind of, here we're back to the logos, to the logics. Things need to be presented in the right order to make a narratological sense. We have a tendency to start out with the background. Here you can produce some important evidence that you will build your entire dissertation upon. It could be in the literature study or the theory section. This also poses as evidence. But also in the methods part, that is an evidence of what you have done. It will also be your results. And it could also be in the discussion part, and especially for the social sciences, where the discussion part has a tendency to be quite large and extensive. This is where you will, using different concepts that you have presented in the theory section, to discuss something. It might be how pupils interact in school. It might be what makes sense, what is important for a pilgrim. It could be a lot of different things. But this will also pose as evidence. And this is obviously your research. So when it comes to the theory section, the literature study, this might be other people's research, but this is your research. And all of this might contain important evidence that will give credibility, but it must be logically connected to have that effect. And here we're back to I like this illustration because it looks like a house, but it also gives some insight into what this person thinks and how they try to connect all these different topics and evidence to tell the story in a way that makes sense for the reader and that presents the research in the best way possible. So the thing is that striving to provide substantial evidence for your claim, for your research, is the ethics of science. We try to build upon what has been done before us. This is a fundamental aspect of any research or science in general. The thing is that if you succeed in doing so, your research is credible, but that's not necessarily true. You don't really have to succeed in the way that your project have to turn out the way you thought it would. The important thing is that your research is transparent. So you might have a hypothesis, but your results show something else. Well, then you have mapped out for other people what not to do, what doesn't work. And that is also valuable. It's just as valuable as finding the right solution. And this will also give credibility. Oops. So now that we have been discussing pathos or logos and ethos, I will try to show you, we're going to analyze an abstract. So let me just find that one. Can everybody see this one? This is an article from Nature. You could use this, not link, but this address, and then you will find the article. But you could also just look at the screen. So I'm only going to read the abstract because I'm not going to be able to analyze and read the whole text. But I think the abstract gives us some interesting insight into how logos and pathos are present in an academic text. So I'm just gonna start reading. This is about large hydropower and water storage potential in future glacier-free basins. Okay. Climate change is causing widespread glacier retreat. And much attention is devoted to negative impacts such as diminishing water resources, shifts in runoff seasonality, and increases in cryosphere-related hazards. Here we focus on a different aspect and explore the water storage and hydropower potential of areas that are expected to become ice-free during the course of this century. For roughly 185,000 sites that are glaciarized at present, we predict the potentially emerging reservoir storage volume and hydropower potential. Using a climate-driven glacier evolution model and topographical analysis, we estimate a theoretical maximal total storage and hydropower potential of 875 plus minus 260 cubic kilometers and 1,355 plus minus 515 terawatt hours per year, respectively. A first-order sustainability assessment that takes into account environmental, technical, and economic factors identifies roughly 40% of this potential. I'm gonna skip this part, as possibly being suitable for realization. 3/4 of the potential storage volume is expected to become ice-free by 2050. and the storage volume would be enough to retain about half of the annual runoff leaving the investigated sites. Although local impacts would need to be assessed on a case-by-case basis, the results indicates that deglaciarizing basins could make important contributions to national energy supplies in several countries, particularly high mountain Asia. So, can we see the logic and evidence, and how? Well, first of all, when we talk about logics, it has a beginning, an introduction, and it has a middle, which is an explanation, and then it has an end, a conclusion, a concluding part. When we think about the paragraph structure, it doesn't really have the best topic sentence, but the rest of it is relatively on point. It starts out with the negative impact or the negative aspects on climate change. Then it changes focus to new and unexplored possibilities in the relative near future. We're talking about 2050. And the logics in this abstract is melting glaciers because of climate change equals to water in glacier-free basins, which will produce resources that can be converted into energy using hydropower. This might help solve future energy needs, and they also specify for a specific region, high mountain Asia. The logic requires a certain narratological structure to make sense. If we reorganize this, it will be confusing. When we talk about evidence or the pathos in this, we could say that the evidence is the documented effects of climate change. And the hypothesis is that rising temperatures will result in melting ice. I wouldn't really call it a hypothesis, but that is the central idea. And this melting ice will turn into water, which we can produce energy from by using hydropower technology. And as I talked about earlier, the evidence here is also produced by using mathematical equations and models to estimate the total amount of water. And here they use different models that take a wide variety of parameters in consideration. And it converts it into terawatts to indicate volume and maybe say something about profitability, but mainly to solve future energy needs. When it comes to these models that they use, they say it's a model that focuses on economic, environmental, and technical aspects. What is also needed, and which poses as evidence, is knowledge about the current state of hydropower technology that could be used to convert this into energy. So this is the logos and the pathos in this abstract. And there's probably other things that you can point out as well, but this is just a way of breaking down or analyzing this text using the rhetorical triangle. So now we'll go back to the presentation. The thing is that we lack one thing, and that is emotions and feelings, or empathy. And you could say that it is persuasion by appealing to feelings and emotions. Once again, it's not about fooling anyone, but it is about implicitly advise someone to take a certain standpoint. And it's obviously based on the information that you have presented, the evidence, the logics of your arguments. But it still is persuasion. And it still will appeal to feelings and emotions if it is something that touches them. So the way to do that is to use structure and evidence, but it also has to do with what kind of words you choose to use, what kind of tone. So In most scientific disciplines, or in every scientific discipline, we use a neutral language and we write ourselves out of the story. Many disciplines don't use the word I. You have to write in a way that you're not really visible in the text. The thing is that you're still present. You're still there. Someone has produced the text, and it will be influenced by you and by your subjectivity. So, and the way you do that is by you use a certain composition, you use a certain language, you address certain people in the way that you predict a certain audience, and you also produce a specific set of evidence to support your claim. And in this sense, it is about writing for and connecting to a specific audience. And once again, as I talked about with the logics, you really want to fulfill expectations. You want to follow a certain way to produce a text, a certain, what can I call it, formality. And this will, and you also want to engage the reader. What also affects this is what your purpose is. Are you trying to explain something? Are you trying to provoke? Do you want to narrate, or are you just narrating something? Are you describing something, or are you trying to validate or falsify, to test, or to persuade? This will affect how you write your text, what kind of words you choose, and how you structure your text, and when and how you produce evidence and how you present it. And in many ways, this can be compared to music. And as I said in the introduction part, this is tone. And I'm going to play you a piece of music to illustrate this, because I think that will make it even easier to understand. Let's see. Here we got it. Okay. So this is the theme song from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Okay. So when listening to this music, we can think that the logic is in many ways the arrangement. It is the combination of multiple melody lines and rhythms to create something that we would categorize as music. And also music of a specific style and for a specific purpose. In this case, it is about capturing the West. So this means that from single note or beat to a melody or a rhythmic pattern. And this particular track consists of flutes, whistles, guitar, percussion, voices, which is shouts and screams and singing, bells, trumpets, orchestra, and etc. Lots of different things. And these flutes and other kinds of blowing instruments, in many cases, are trying to imitate animal sounds. So this is the logics. But it also produces a certain amount of evidence. Think about it this way. Certain instruments and compositional traits will act as evidence that helps us logically decide the genre of the piece. You could call this the ethics of a genre. So once again, country does not have the same genre-specific ethics as metal does. There are some differences. But you could also say that each piece of music has its internal logic. And this one specifically has a Western theme. And it follows the compositional traits of music made for movies. So it builds to a climax and it tries to give the listener an idea of what the movie is about. So it tries to clearly communicate suspense and what we think about when we want to watch a spaghetti Western movie. It also builds upon a musical legacy that bases and communicates that it bases everything upon. So what I mean about a musical legacy is that it's sounds that we are used to hear in a specific context. It could be putting reverb on a guitar to make it sound like an open landscape, or it could be the use of rhythmic patterns to make it sound like guns or cannons. And it also about how film music in general tends to be composed. When it comes to the empathy part, this is how the music makes you feel. If the music makes you feel anything, that is empathy. And this has a lot to do with the intention of the song. It could be a happy song, or it could be a sad song, and the mood of the song is produced because of the tones that is used and the arrangements of the song. So in this case, there's a reason that this is a famous soundtrack. It captures what the film is about. It captures the feel perfectly. It defines in many ways what spaghetti Western is all about. And every instrument and sound is there for a specific reason, and it has an intention behind it. It's supposed to give you, to make you think about Indians, about open landscapes, shootouts, riding horses, life and death, good or bad, black hat, white hat, win or lose, freedom, all these different things. So in many cases, it wants to capture certain stereotypes and really wants to present the essence in as effective as possible. So now we're going to go back to the abstract. And now we're going to try to read it with intention in mind and how that affects the composition. So first, it starts out with the negative aspects of climate change. But then it changes focus to new and unexplored possibilities to help solve future energy needs. And the thing is that how you perceive this depends on your political orientation. So what is the point of this? Is it the noble search for a solution to energy problems in the future? Is it for profit? And here we kind of touch upon the ethics of science. What happens when connected to a larger context? So another interesting thing is that we tend to try to hide subjectivity with use of objective language. The thing is that it is okay that we are biased in our research because our research is personally subjective, but we can still conduct research in a more or less objective way, obviously depending on our science, but that is the goal. But you cannot avoid that all research has some form of normative subjectivity, and it will be guided by what your intention is. So it could be, if your intention is to get rid of something that is bad, let's say cancer, then the way you write will be affected by how you perceive this, how your thoughts about cancer, that you find it to be a bad thing, as most people do. Or if you write about something or promote something that is good, it could be a new way, it could be about sustainable development, it could be about forest conservation, it could be about many different things, but that will affect the language and it will affect how you decide to compose your text. So let's go back to the PowerPoint presentation. So we're going to end with, when we think about the rhetorical triangle, we've been discussing logics, emotion, evidence. You should try to understand the purpose of your own writing, because that will affect the language that you decide to use and also the structure of your texts. So, are you writing about a problem? Well, what we do with problems is that we try to find a solution. Maybe you are focusing on a puzzle. So with a puzzle, I mean that there might be lots of different sources, lots of information that hasn't really been connected to create a clear or a larger picture. So that might be, So that might be what you're trying to do. Create a clear picture by putting the puzzle together. Or it might be a gap in knowledge. So let's say that there's done tons of research on one specific thing and a lot of research also on something very similar to it, but there's not done anything that connects the two. Then maybe that will be a way to fill the gap. What you should also keep in mind, and this is something that was presented earlier when I showed you the IMRAD structure, and that is what, why, and how. So if you think about the abstract should tell us what the person are writing about, why this is important, and how they are going to solve this problem. So how they're going to conduct their experiment or how they're going to do this. So this is all about, if you answer these three, you will develop insight and analysis. So if we take a final look at the abstract, here we got it. So is it a problem that these people are trying to solve? Is it a puzzle that they're trying to piece together to get a clear picture, or is it a gap? To me, it seems like it's a problem. They're trying to solve future energy needs, but maybe you will find it to be a puzzle or a gap. But that's the way I see it. So to finish off, I know that there's been lots of problems with this first webinar. I have no idea how many of you that have been able to listen to what I've been saying, been able to see my face. I have no idea how the technicalities of this have been working out. We will try to make a nice little video about this, which we will post on Canva, so you can watch it there with sound, all the content that I've been showing and I've been analyzing, and we will try to do our best to make the next webinar work. I'm so sorry if this did not fulfill your expectations, but we will do our best to succeed next time. Take care and see you at the end of next month.